بسم الله الحمد لله ثم الصلاة والسلام على من لا نبي بعده محمد بن عبد الله صلوات ربنا والسلام عليه وبعد. Khalid ibn Walid ibn Mughira al-Makhzumi al-Qurashi. Khalid ibn Walid was born into the aristocratic Makhzum tribe, and his father was a very wealthy man, so much so that the tribe or the family did not need to engage in any form of serious occupation. They were very wealthy. They were one of the aristocrats or aristocratic family in Mecca, part and parcel of the Qurashi clan. Khalid ibn Walid lived, of course, given the family was wealthy, a life of luxury and opulence, and he was one of those very, very agile knightsman, or knight as the case may be. He was good on the horse, he was nimble, and then of course when the call to Islam came, he just told the position of his family. His family against the da'wah of the Prophet ﷺ, the call of the Prophet ﷺ, and Khalid ibn Walid also told the line of the family. Now, this was generally the background to Khalid ibn Walid's pre-Islamic background. Basically, it was just inherited hatred. The aristocrats of Mecca hated the dawah of the Prophet ﷺ, and his family was part of the aristocratic families in Mecca. So his clan hated the Prophet. He also hated the Prophet ﷺ. And of course, the clan had a variety of reasons, like their inherited religion was being threatened, their way of life was being threatened, their authority over Meccan society was being threatened, and they felt that no way on earth we're going to accept for this man. Theologically, socially, economically, they had problems with the Prophet ﷺ, and then they opposed him. And then Khalid ibn Walid just followed in tandem. One of the stiffest and greatest opponents of the Prophet is Al-Walid ibn Mughira, who was the father of Khalid ibn Walid. So when one looks at Khalid ibn Walid, as I mentioned, he was a very good horseman, a knight, as people would rather put it. And then when you look at his military history, it seems to be somebody who is naturally strategic. People are gifted in different ways. If you look at the companions of the Prophet ﷺ, you see the scholars amongst them, you see those who issue fatwa amongst them, you see administrators amongst them, which sort of shows how varied people are as far as their natural talents are. Khalid ibn Walid was a natural military strategist. So let's even go through the wars that they had with the Prophet ﷺ. At Badr, he was there against the Prophet ﷺ. At Uhud, he was there against the Prophet ﷺ. At Khandak, he was there. It was after Khaybar that he became Muslim. But in Badr, in Uhud, and in Khandak, particularly in Uhud, right? And then in Khandak, in Uhud, where it was more serious, it was the one that inflicted the major defeat on the Prophet ﷺ. So the Prophet ﷺ had this group of archers on a hilltop overlooking the battleground. So enemy forces could not go through that place to hit the Muslims from the back. And then when the archers on that particular strategic location realized that, okay, the Muslims were winning, and then the Quraysh and their armies were on the back foot, they descended to also participate in the spoils of war. And Khalid was, as I said, he had a sign, he had this eye for military weakness in the opponent. Because that hill was not totally devoid of archers, right? There were still some there. But he only realized that, okay, the population are so reduced that if they mounted an offensive on that hill, they would take it. And that was what he did exactly. He took the hill and inflicted massive harm on the Muslim army from behind. So much so that the Muslims were routed. And it took the special heel of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala before they could reorganize themselves and withdraw from the battlefield. Same thing he did in Khandak. He actually was looking for the Prophet ﷺ in the battle of Khandak. The only thing with Khandak was that every weakness he tried to look for in the pits that were, or the trenches that were made around Medina. He could not find any, right? So he was somebody who had an eye for military weakness and was a natural born military strategist. Now, Islam gives honor to people, right? If he had not become Muslim, of course, we would not have remembered Khalid ibn Al-Walid in any positive light today, right? It would just have been like any other of the Quraysh who fought against the Prophet ﷺ, who lost and gained, and they get buried in a dustbin of history. So because he was very instrumental to Islam, so much so that the Prophet ﷺ nicknamed him Saifullah al-Maslul, the unsheathed sword of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That is why his history lives with us today. I mean, you would read the text of the Quran and Sunnah and see people like Abdullah ibn Abbas when you're talking about fatwa, or you're talking about tafsir, Abdullah ibn Umar, Abdullah ibn Mas'ud. You see their names. The only point at which you see the name of Khalid ibn Walid is when he's on the battlefield. So, yes, his prowess as a very good horseman, a very good warrior is there, but it was Islam that actually entrenched his name in the annals of history. There are a lot of things for young Muslims to learn from Khalid ibn Walid. One of them is what is called ar-rujula, masculinity, being a man. I mean, it seems the world over, there is a crisis of masculinity. We see the way people sort of meal around people like Jordan Peterson or somebody like Andrew Tate, because these people exuded a sort of masculinity that was missing in the life of young people. Not Muslims alone, even young people generally. So these people talked about masculinity, and you see the way people flock around them. You realize that yes, there's masculinity missing in the life of people generally. And then also for Muslims, when Andrew Tate became Muslim, we were all like, oh, he's like the Umar ibn Khattab of our era. No. So our masculinity is not a toxic kind. It's not the exploitative type. Our type of masculinity is that exuded by people like Khalid ibn Walid. When it's time for you to take action, you are stern, you are resolved, you are brave. So every Muslim young person is supposed to look at Khalid ibn Walid as a very powerful role model. When it's time for you to be strong, then you're strong. When it's time for you to be gentle, you're gentle. So also, Khalid ibn Walid came from a very wealthy family. He had prestige, he had honor. And then this did not stop him from becoming a dutiful Muslim, right? For a lot of us, we look at our circumstances, look at our social class, we look at our environment, and we feel that, no, I don't want to be backward with Islam, I don't want to practice Islam. No, it was not like that for Khalid ibn Walid. Immediately he became Muslim, he made himself available for the services of Islam. And everything he had of talent, he judiciously used it for the propagation of Islam. So there's a lot of things to learn about the life and times of Khalid ibn Walid, particularly for young Muslim males. Talking about the Prophet ﷺ accepting him, when I was going through the story of Khalid ibn Walid, this also struck me, that this was a person who inflicted major pain, harm on the Muslims, particularly at the Battle of Uhud. So much so that people are saying the Prophet ﷺ had been killed. But when it came around to become Muslim, the Prophet ﷺ welcomed him and embraced him. Shows the power of forgiveness and shows the power of reconciliation. And when you become Muslim, whatever you have done in the past of sins is forgiven. As for Khalid ibn Walid and what tipped him ultimately to accept Islam, it was already growing in him, particularly after the Treaty of Hudaybiyah. Hudaybiyah occurred when the Muslims came from Medina to do their pilgrimage in Mecca. Initially, the Meccans assumed that he was coming to attack them until they realized that no, they were peaceful. In fact, they said that when they were praying, right? It came to Khalid's mind that should I attack them now? But what held him back was that chivalry of a warrior, that I will not attack somebody who is unharmed and not prepared for war. So the particular thing, so it was in his mind after the beard, why don't I become Muslim? Until his brother wrote him a letter. And this letter pushed him ultimately into accepting Islam and moving to Prophet ﷺ to give him his allegiance. Now, so basically this is what Islam revolves about. Islam is about the redemption of man, the fallibility of man, and the possibility of redemption. We do not need any special sacrifice for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to forgive our sin, irrespective of how heinous, irrespective of how serious that particular sin is. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is always ready for us to come around and He will forgive us. In as much as we fulfill all what is necessary of what is called the conditions of tawbah. That is, you stop the sin, you show sorrow for what you have done, and take the decision that you are not going to go back to this sin that you have committed. In as much as these things are fulfilled, Allah is always ready to accept our forgiveness. There is no need for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to send His Son to die on the cross for us. There's no need for us to slaughter an animal for us to be redeemed in the sight of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Our redemption is in our own hands. And that was what Khalid ibn Al-Walid did. And from an opponent of the Prophet ﷺ, he became one of the generals of Islam. Saifullah al-Maslul, the unsheathed sword of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, as the Prophet ﷺ used to call him. Basically, in as much as you are ready to turn a new leaf, Allah is ready to be with you. Khalid ibn Walid, as I said earlier, with all he had done at Uhud, at Badr, at Khandak, that he wanted to kill the Prophet ﷺ himself. With all he had done, he was accepted by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, accepted by the Muslim community, and ultimately he died a happy man on his bed, celebrating the fact that he had really served Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The question I would have loved to ask Khalid ibn Walid was ultimately, what made you turn your back on the fame and the fortunes you had and then embrace Islam ultimately? And then of course I would also like to add to it, what made you continue to be a staunch opponent of the Prophet ﷺ for so long? Those are the two questions I would like to put to Khalid ibn Walid. Now, basically, it's natural military talent. If you look at the wars of Khalid ibn Walid, you realize that this person has a natural affinity and is naturally talented for conflict. At the battle of Uhud, while he was against the Muslims, we saw what he did. He stood back, studied the Muslim army, identified their weak point, and utilized it. At the battle of Mu'tah, right, where 3 Muslim generals lost their lives. Zayd ibn Haritha, Ja'far ibn Abi Talib, Ibn Rawaha, all of them lost their life until the banner and the standard of the army was given to Khalid ibn Walid. And then when he looked at it, he realized that no, for us to continue in this war would be defeat for us. It is time to withdraw. This one community strategy. You are able to, in the heat of the moment, you are able to weigh your strengths and your weaknesses and say that should we forge ahead or should we withdraw? And he withdrew the army. And that was why when the Prophet ﷺ was telling people, where he even got his name, was telling people, said, okay, Ja'far has fallen, Zayd has fallen, Ibn Rawah has fallen, and then Allah gave the banner to one of his swords. They got the nickname Saifullah al-Maslul. And he withdrew. When he was going to fight the Persians, this is another place whereby he displayed his military genius. When he was going to fight the Persians, he put them into a sort of psychological dilemma. The Persian army under Hormuz were camped in a place expecting Khalid, and then he's going to carry out a maneuver, they assume that, okay, it's going to this way, the turn there is no longer there, and then they come around to ultimately face in. What also shows that this military prowess is a natural talent was his desire to enter into one-on-one battle conflicts with people on the battlefield. For Urmuz, one of the mistakes he made was to call Khalid ibn Al-Walid out for war. And then Khalid ibn Al-Walid was very easily defeated him and killed him. When the head of the army was dead, the troops were demoralized and it became very easy to run them all up.